Now it's time to move the rear of the seat forward so that I can reach the pedals. Apparently the guy who built this car was like 6'6" or something like that, but I'm not. So you see that the rear of the seat's been removed, and we have a really nice steel backing plate here to work with. This is the cushion. It's probably about 4 inches thick, and as you can see, it's held in at the top with 3 snaps. Now my plan is to build a seat backing out of wood that is spaced about 4 inches out at the bottom and about 1.5 inches out at the top, so that you have a nice kind of a recline, but down here your hips are far enough forward that you can reach the pedals. By you, I mean me. Alright, here's the lower seat back spacer. I use the 4-inch by 3/4 inch plank as a flange to hold it to the rear, so this gives me the spacing of close to 4 inches out here. And then we'll mount the 2x4 up here and then put in that piece of plywood, lay the cushion against it, and see how it feels. I decided to make the upper seat support into like a little narrow package tray. So I cut this at an angle so that it is perfectly horizontal when it's attached to that sheet metal seat back. Then I made 3 brackets which will be bent at the proper angle, and drill them, and now I'm going to screw these into the wood, and then these will go into the sheet metal to hold this in place. Okay, here's that upper package tray with the brackets properly bent and attached, and now we're going to install it here on this sheet metal seat back. Okay, the upper and lower support boards are in place, and now I'm going to install that piece of flat plywood against. Then as a final touch, before I install the plywood back here, I put a fairly heavy layer of indoor-outdoor carpeting that will dampen the vibration and rattle from this flat piece of sheet metal. Now I'm ready to install the plywood. The panel has been installed, and now it's time to upholster the top here of this shelf, and I've got a matching red vinyl to match this, so it will all fit together. Well, I applied the contact cement to that package shelf and wrapped it with a matching red naga hide, then installed the 3 snaps, snapped in the seat, and as you can see, I think it all looks pretty darn nice. Looks like it came that way. It's kind of a windy day, and I hope the wind doesn't interfere with the audio too much, but as you can see, the most obvious change in the car is the wheel color, which I sprayed red lacquer, and I installed Baby Moon hubcaps. Now this was not easy to do because these wheels, believe it or not, are police car spares. Okay, these are Space Saver spare wheels. They put like a little donut tire on them so they don't take up a lot of room in like Crown Victorias and other Ford cars like that. So there's no need for hubcaps on spare tire wheels, so there's no rims or lugs or anything. So I took these off of that 40 Ford truck, and to install them I had to drill through the outer layer and then using sheet metal screws on that inner flange attach them to the wheel. So I thought that turned out pretty slick. Okay, there's nothing more insolent and in your face than fire engine red wheels. Let's take a look here. As you remember, the baffles were built for the pipes. The 32 grill shell was installed, and let's take a look inside at some of the major differences that have occurred. Alright, here's the driver's side view, and as you can see, the visibility's pretty darn good. I put in glass in the little side windows and in the back window, which is no fun because when the top was chopped, there were all sorts of inconsistencies in the mounting surfaces for the glass. It was an absolute nightmare to install the glass in this. I don't have the glass on the doors yet, but I may do that. It would make it a little more civilized, I guess. I got an antique Ford rear view mirror, but one of the main things I did was, if you remember, the steering rod up here was just a bare piece of pipe, and the steering wheel could move several inches up and down, which wasn't too neat. So I took a piece of galvanized pipe, wrapped it around the outside of the steering column, and then I used my lathe and made a nylon bushing here that fits inside the pipe, so that the steering pipe here is steady. And then, using this fixed steering column, I was able to mount turn signals and a horn. Up here I made a little dash, and I put in a GPS speedometer, and I also installed, I'll show you in a minute, a sensor for the gas tank. And this was the gauge that went with that sensor, so now I know how much gas I have or don't have. This is a switch that controls the dedicated electrical supply to the satellite reading speedometer. You actually have to have that. If any of you have one of these GPS speedometers, you're having trouble, let me know. I'll tell you how to fix it. Okay, over here, this was pretty standard, but the battery kept going dead. And I thought, well, that's strange because it's a fairly new battery. Well, the alternator wasn't working, and I had no way of knowing that. So I put in a voltmeter, and now naturally when you turn on the key and it shows about 12 volts, but when you start the car it jumps up to 14 to show that the alternator is working. Got the nice 8-ball gear shift, and that's about it, I guess, for the inside, other than I made, and I don't know if you can see them clearly up here, brackets that support where they cut the roof. This was real weak and was flapping in the breeze. So I made brackets here, and then I ran heavy, good stout wood above the doors to solidify this piece here, so that when you slam the doors, the whole thing wasn't wiggling around. And now things are pretty rock solid. Closes like a tomb. Now, before we go back outside and take a look at what's been done to the rear suspension, let's fire this up. Electric fuel pump. Don't have to go far to find the exhaust. It's real funny when I'm cruising and not stepping on the gas hard. Notice how the sound actually diminishes, but at idle you get that nice loping cam. We'll go for a ride in a future video. It's a little rough, like a buckboard, but that's part of the fun. The idle is real raunchy, but when you step on the gas a little, it really kind of quiets down. Let's go take a look at the suspension changes. Here's the outside view. I put in tinted glass so it looked more menacing. You never know what's going on inside when the glass is tinted. Okay, let's take a look in the trunk, and you'll see some modifications I made. First, let me show you. The rear end was almost dragging the ground on this thing. I lifted it 3.5 or 4 inches in the rear. I like them raked a little bit. A little higher in the back, a little lower in the front. So to do that, though, was a whole lot easier said than done. Since the frame comes up with the car, I had to cut a deep notch in the cross member and then seal that. But if you look underneath, before I did that, I welded in a heavier gauge piece of square tubing to reinforce the area where the cut. Then the Panhard rod, of course, wouldn't reach once this comes up, so I had to move its point of attachment from here and weld on a new bracket and install it here so that it can keep the rear end square with the body. Here is the sensor for the fuel tank, and one other change that was necessary was to raise up the shocks to the highest hole there in the shock bracket and then tighten them up a little bit, and that's how the rear end was actually lifted. Also, the rear brakes weren't worth a darn, so I took the drums off, coated them with a ceramic heavy-duty aluminum paint, and then installed new brake shoes and brake cylinders. So now the rear brakes work great, although the front discs really do the vast majority of the stopping. Oh, and I forgot, one of the worst and unforeseen problems associated with raising the rear end was that the pinion angle was completely wrong. The nose of the differential rose way up high. It was just outrageous. So I had to remove the rear end here from the car, essentially leaving it in place under the car, and adjust these hairpins, both top and bottom, to get the pinion angled back to normal. And that was pretty scary, because once you separate the part of the car that's holding it up from the car, a lot of bad things can happen. Fortunately, none of them did. So to make a rather subtle change of raising the rear end about 3.5 or 4 inches took like 2.5 days. Okay, no one would believe it. You'd think you'd just go in and tighten up the springs on the coilovers. No, it's never that easy. Okay, so that's the update on the hot rod at this point. Lots more will get done, and I will keep you posted. Thanks for watching.